going to reorganise the agenda and we will jump forward to DC 222, which is the independent review of the Marine Precinct Part 1. So Nick, I think you're going to introduce that.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, I hope you've all had a chance to read the report. What I'll do is, that being the case, I'll take it as read and just here to answer any questions, and I will take those now if there are any.
Liz, if you've found the appropriate pages.
So this is page 238 of your agenda.
Remember, this is report part 1. The second report will cover the operational issues that have been raised. Aldo.
Yeah, I guess one of the issues going forward is going to be this issue around the construction, whether the private owners do a construction of their own additional pier, which isn't, and in the report it's saying that, you know, we will have an opportunity through the consenting process to make sure that we feel it's all right. Are we confident of that opportunity to intervene there?
There's a couple of points here. So we hold a regional resource consent for the occupation of the coastal marine area. As part of that, I believe there's actually 2 wharves that are potentially looking to progress. There's one from RMD Marine and Pacific 7. And this is all, I should say, quite new, and I haven't had a chance to fully explore how this will work. New to me, I should say. But as part of that, we would have to have a very close look at things like navigational workability, how that interacts with, say, our dredge channels and the like that we've put in at the Marine Precinct. And also there's the existing ice wharf that's down there. So we've got plans for redevelopment of that as well. So all of this is something that is still to be, I guess, worked out how it will all interact, what TCC will say and do, and as part of that, of course, stakeholder engagement will also be a fundamental part of that. So that's still to come, in short.
Can I just clarify that? Do we have, the fact that we hold that consent, do we have the ability to then to say no, or do we have to have, you know, evidence to suggest that it's a problem in order to say no? If you can get my drift there.
Well, I think if I can go back a step before answering, part of the Marine Precinct is obviously to try and encourage some of this type of activity and commercial, I guess, development. But of course, it does still have to work, like I said, and we do hold the consent, but I don't think we would hopefully have to get into any position where we would say no. It's just how do we make sure it works in the right way and can say yes in a way that's workable to all interests.
I'll just ask a question too. With the recommendations, there's one there that potentially might be urgent if we take note of those recommendations, and that is reconsider the desirability of selling lot 13. So where are we at with that, just so that we know before we make a decision on that? I take it it's on hold, it's not actually happening, or is it?
Through the chair, before we get into that, I suppose it would be logical to look at some of the other recommendations around how we make these decisions, and in particular, I suppose the stakeholder group to try and look at these and make those decisions. That would have to be part of it before we made a final call, would be my take. But look, I haven't had a chance with Paul Davidson being away to really get that far ahead so far.
Well, but at the moment, there's nothing on the table for selling that. That's what I want. You know, otherwise, of course, that would be taken out of our hands if it already had happened. That's what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose going back to the somewhat optimistic view that we can come to a position where everyone's aspirations can be accommodated. My question is, have there been any prior commitments made to any parties, either as conditions of leases or whatever? Have there been any prior commitments made to either parties? It seems to me there's a question in front of us, but we're somewhat conflicted if we've made any prior commitments to either any parties.
Well, again, I can't speak to any prior commitments, only simply because I've only been involved in this for about 7 days. I'm happy to, I suppose, take that back and come back on that particular question. Perhaps what I would note is that, as I mentioned earlier to Councillor Baldock, there is still that anticipation that some development would take place, and that degree of control that we have over that process. I haven't seen anything to suggest from my preliminary discussions with RMD, or more accurately their planning representative, that they're not open to discussion of, for example, changes in design, looking at how much water space is being occupied, and again, working around some of the inherent navigation requirements that are there at that site. So very early days, but I haven't seen anything that sort of suggests that there's a firm, I guess, fixed plan for these wharf developments.
Okay, let's come at this another way. I'm somewhat concerned at the recommendations contained in DC 222, which seem to make no commitments to anything other than receiving a report and noting recommendations. You know, in terms of the recommendation, in terms of what this council's specifically going to vote on, can you give me something more to work with, which I might choose to incorporate as an amendment to the substantive motions that sit in front of us? You know, we can note recommendations, but there's no commitment to recognise their validity or act to mitigate or to resolve. Nothing in the recommended motions.
Through the chair, I suppose I would go back to the need to, I guess, reset and take stock before we get to that point. I'm conscious, speaking for myself, that I need to get to know some of the people down there to the extent that I'm getting involved in this more and more. I suppose this is a report that really does recommend some steps before we make concrete decisions or actions as a council as a whole. Beyond that, perhaps if the elected member could perhaps clarify the types of things he might be thinking of.
Perhaps through the chair, if I could respond, that in the table on page 2 and 3 of the report, there is both the recommendations and the organisational response. I think in terms of a resolution from council, the proposed organisation response is something that councillors would either support or otherwise not support, or wish to see something else happen. But perhaps in terms of a council resolution, I'd seek that you endorse the organisational response.
Yeah, Councillor Brown and then Robson and Malloy.
My question was the same as how would we go about implementing the recommendations, particularly the advisory group, and maybe the advisory group would be the first step and then the others follow, because I know there's a group of passionate people sitting behind us that would very much like to contribute some to that process.
Councillor Malloy.
Advisory group, apart from its name, what sort of input would they have then to the running of that precinct, of the marine precinct? How much would they have any teeth, or is it how would it work?
Look, one of the issues I think that probably is going to be drawn out more in the second phase of this report is the communication, engagement and discussions that have been going on down there by the manager of the precinct and the wide range of users, stakeholders and owners down there. For that very reason, I think we need to establish a group with a degree of formality and structure so we can actually start having conversations that might be more meaningful, aspirational, as opposed to trying to deal with issue by issue generally in hindsight. It seems that there aren't proactive conversations about, for example, how are things operating for the various stakeholders? Simple questions like that, as opposed to dealing with issues, whether they be technical or retrospective, and trying to, if you like, band-aid everything.
Referring to the earlier response from the Chief Executive with regard to the organisational response, I'm seriously concerned about their response to item 2. The Council will work with the applicant to work through these recommendations as quickly as practicable. It suggests, there are a number of stakeholders that have an interest in, the applicant's view with regard to wharves, but those stakeholders aren't recognised in that organisational response, and I suppose that goes to the substantive issue here, that regardless of best intent, at the beginning of this project, there was a failure to engage with all the stakeholders to do the necessary, what I call, pre-project role, the necessary project initiation. I mean, my view very much at the moment, unless I receive additional information, which would be late, is that we should be very clear that we're putting a stop to anything at the moment, and then getting our ducks in a row. I don't know exactly what words would be in a motion to that effect. Ducks in a row may not be the exact words used. Get our ducks in a row, and I agree with the observation by my fellow councillor that advisory group needs to be a starting point. But I'm concerned if we suggest that by inference the organisational response is where we go in the meantime, because I'm concerned if we start making progress and wind up being seen to implicitly or explicitly endorse something which may later turn out to be not deliverable. We need to serve everyone here fairly, which is why my original question is, are there any prior commitments here?
Perhaps I can speak to that. And so the first point is, as I alluded to, we have had a preliminary meeting with RMD about their intentions for the wharf. I should say RMD and Pacific 7. But within that, I guess ultimately, because it's our regional resource consent that we hold, we have the ability to ultimately have quite a ability to say no. Within that, we need to look at, for example, the stakeholder group that we've been talking about, and also timing and I guess practical things like when we want to have the wharf that we're planning to have finished, working backwards from there. I think absolutely take your point about having to, I guess, in my words, reset this and set up that stakeholder group to try and guide some of that. I would hope that some of that can happen in parallel, because through these processes, whether that's RMD and Pacific 7's wharf or Tauranga City Council's own, there will be a need under the RMA to go through a consultation process. And that'll be dictated by some of the planning requirements through the regional council, for example. But as part of that, I think, provided that we're working in parallel on those two streams, and we are acutely conscious of the need not to, I guess, commit to something that we later find out is problematic, then I hope that gives some assurance that we are working through this.
I am not yet fully reassured in the sense that my understanding is engagement should come before consultation. As a matter of fact, that was a very clear topic of discussion earlier this day in this chamber. We do the engagement first, we understand what the issues are for all the stakeholders before we start going into a process that requires consultation. I just not comfortable yet. I'm only one of 11.
Through you, Your Worship. Look, we have spent time, obviously, with the individual parties or different groups. There is now a time where the aspirations and the development opportunities for the marine precinct in the water need to be populated. Not only do they need to be shared with others and discussed, there needs to be technical assessment done so that one doesn't impinge on the other, and that any development that occurs down there doesn't interfere with the current operation, let alone any future operation. So it's our commitment to form a group that in some way will be used to populate the information and to have what I would call proactive conversations as opposed to reactive ones, that a process of the commercial fishing public wharf can develop alongside the aspirations for the private one, because essentially the two need to be able to talk together so that one doesn't impact on the other. And we believe we can achieve that.
Happy to second the motion from the Chief Executive, although it's somewhat unusual. If we could just get it written into the recommendations, that would be great.
In terms of council having the ability to say no to any development on the water, like the pier, it was my understanding that the pier was included in the sale of the land portion to the RMD or Pacific 7 or whatever. Wasn't there a right included in that sale of that land to include a pier of a certain size?
And that's a good point, Councillor, and I should clarify, I'm talking about, I suppose I've been brought in quite recently to look at the RMA side of things and the technical applications that are needed, that being my background as an RMA lawyer. I can't speak to some of the sale and purchase arrangements. I am aware that those exist, and tied up in that is some, I suppose, access to water entitlements and so on. However, as I said earlier on, within that there's still the very important question of how it actually looks and where it goes to and the size and scale and all of that. And so what I perhaps can say at this point is that there is still, as I understand it, the ability to have quite a significant say on ultimate design. And I would go back to another point I've raised earlier and perhaps can expand upon. We do need to have, I guess, a baseline of information to understand what the capacity is in this marine precinct as a whole, from a technical point of view, from a navigation point of view. And I think, yes, absolutely, to address some of the earlier comments and go back to yours, Councillor Carrick, we want to, I suppose, start from that point of a technical basis, but engagement absolutely does come before any of that. But I think if we're operating in a complete vacuum, it's a tough one to do. So I think my thoughts, albeit that I'm new to this, is that's almost a talking piece. It's an understanding of what physically needs to happen for boats to move around in that area, and that's including the existing users and future users, our own, I guess, hoist arrangements and so on. But we do need to have that understanding, I think, to actually have a meaningful process going forward.
Just recommendations 3 and 4 just seem a little strange in that we're waiting for a second part of a report, and I can't see a date in here. It just says it will be reported to a committee at some future date. Do we have any general idea how far away that second part of the report is? Because you're saying you can't draft the terms of reference until that's come, and would you sort of want to start on that part of it as part of the discussion with forming the group, I would have thought. Is there any time frame there?
Perhaps I can say that one of the issues is it's quite a technical area, so we need to source someone with the requisite skills to understand that. It's quite a narrow field, is my understanding. Certainly very aware of the time constraints and the need to keep this moving, but ultimately I believe Paul Davidson's words were we need to find some people that have a very particular set of I guess, maritime and knowledge around those types of areas that operate. So I think we're pulling out all the stops to try and find that, but I can't say at this point.
Does that include looking for the independent chair potentially as well at this stage? Or starting the process of looking for an independent chair that you envisage? Will run the advisory group? But my question was, when will that second part of the report be landing, roughly? Before Christmas, after Christmas?
No, I would have thought before the end of this triennium. I can confirm that. But perhaps picking up on Councillor Robson's thoughts on a resolution, if Council was to accept that recommendation 2 in the organisational response, that a note be made in relation to the response that Council will work with all parties to achieve development within the precinct area, to do its best to meet the aspirations of all those parties. I mean, here, you're right, it just focuses on one applicant, but the recommendation actually refers to the new wharves. So the response should be to ensure that any development there is synergy between the two new developments that are proposed.
Thank you. So I like the recommendations, especially the Marine Precinct Advisory Group. Just with regard to the wharves that are required, so I understand that would be, if it's practical or possible, would it be by lot 13, is that right? And if my understanding is correct, it's to not sell lot 13? Could someone just clarify for me?
Yes, through the chair. Just give me 2 seconds and I'll bring up that page that has a plan on it.
While the map's coming up on the overhead, can I just go back to the very beginning of this project where public access was important and then somehow got diluted and vanished off the plans altogether? So if there were some wharves, would they be for private use, or can anyone help me with that?
Public-private. So not necessarily, but arguably they would need to be managed in such a way that commercial interests were supported.
And is there a possibility that there could be public access onto the wharf?
Well, it's actually it is a working environment, so there'd need to be careful consideration to that, and many of the lots have actually been privately sold. So arguably it would be public access, but by arrangement and carefully managed, and possibly at a cost.
And I might perhaps chip in there because I have pulled up the plan, which is the one I'm looking at on page 249 of the agenda. So the wharves that I've been talking about are actually lot 2 and lot 3. So around there, they're the existing wharves. If you know the area, it's the old one that's got the ice, that's got the Tauranga Moana ice box thing on top of it. So we're there and beside there. I think another key thing, and this is, I'm a big fan of, I guess, reaching things through an organic stage process. So I imagine all those issues that you've spoken about, Councillor, would have to be worked through this process. I think that would happen naturally, but just to echo what Marty Grenfell has just said, look, it is a working environment, so we do have to be cognisant of those issues.
Okay, so in trying to come to a resolution here, we've got to get something that encompasses the idea of this group, which was part of the original deal, an advisory group, and we've also got to try and, I think it's a no-brainer to decide to put on hold the potential sale of lot 13 until things are thought through more. And then the other issue that is, and I think it's exercising people's minds is the effects of navigation. So we have to come with a way of resolving that. So we've got a couple of people that have bought land, and some of them want to put private wharves out there, and then others have said, well, there's a concern, how will that affect the navigation? So we have to find a way of having someone independent to test that, because we are not experts. Just the same as when we have a resource consent hearing, we'll have engineers come along and, you know, one party will say, oh, the engineering isn't good enough, and the other one will say, yes, it is, and you get to, you know, the sound, we have audio engineers, and there must be some sort of a navigational expert that we can get, and I think that's what you're talking about looking for. But how do we encompass this in the resolution that that this is going to happen, that these steps are going to happen? Yeah, Councillor Curran. Yeah.
Councillor Robson just suggested before to change C, the word to act on, rather than, what's the current word? I'm not on that page, notes. Because if you go to the recommendations, that's 19, 20, 21 and 22 on page 248. I mean, I think that covers most of what you've raised. Or implement, or progress, or a word, similar. Councillor Robson, what do you think?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think there's a couple of points that I've alluded to, and I perhaps speak to the people that are here today as well. We are cognizant and we are thinking about this need for I guess, someone to come along and provide some objective advice around navigation. I would have hoped to have, I guess, staged it out and had a chance to speak to you, but since it's come up today, yes, that is firmly in our minds, and we have raised that with RMD and Pacific 7. Some, I guess, preliminary discussions around who that might be have been had, but we probably need to have that with the wider people with interest down there. I believe it would be someone with particular, for example, harbour master skills and an ability to look at things like tidal flows, depths, vessel sizing, and things that get outside my sort of maritime knowledge, to be perfectly honest. But it's certainly already been raised to date. I haven't yet had a chance to lock that in. You appreciate that as we go through this and appoint things like a planning consultant and so on, we have to go through proper processes, procurement and so on. So it's certainly been in the preliminary discussions, haven't yet had a chance to raise that with wider interest down there, and conscious that we have to go through this process before we jump too far ahead into the nuts and bolts of what actually needs to happen.
So with that suggestion in mind, if we did take those words from 19, 20, 21 and 22, and then perhaps added something like that we note the importance of working with all stakeholders in this and any future developments, would that be the way of coming up with a resolution? Councillor Robson, I think. Yeah.
I appreciate Councillor Kurak sort of, help. Yeah, but my concern, I suppose, is with the organisational response, I've already said I'm uncomfortable with that. With regard to the recommendations, I'm comfortable with those, but I do believe they need an order, and that's my concern. And I think can be made reasonably quickly and requires no significant external expertise. It's a matter of mitigating risk and allowing for future possibilities. But I'm concerned that 2 would be done concurrently and possibly even ahead of 3 and 4. And it seems to me we should be not just acting on the recommendations, assuming we're happy with the quality of the thinking in the report, but we should be looking at 2, the wharves, post having the advisory group and its independent chair, so we can get advice. Otherwise, we're in the situation of potentially doing something that we then later appoint a chair and he says, well, actually declines the acceptance of the chairpersonship, apologies, it's 2019. A person we appoint declines the position of chair because she feels that we've actually prejudiced her position. So it's not just the recommendations, it's the order of the recommendations that gives me pause. Is there any reason why we can't get this advisory group up, which would by definition require talking to stakeholders? And once we've got all that in place and an independent chair, we can then take their advice to and be guided in a place where it's freely admitted, certainly by me, I don't own a boat, that, you know, I'm out of my depth, pardon the pun.
Look, in response to that, look, we should be setting up this advisory group straight away, irrespective of a external and independent review. It just seems like a good way of doing business, putting formality around working with a range of different stakeholders through which we can communicate and engage. So the answer to that is that will be given a priority over any other issue that we'll deal with in the precinct.
Yeah, and could I just add that that advisory group have more experience probably amongst them about navigation than perhaps an expert so-called who's going to present to a resource consent thing. We would want to know that was tested against people that are in the water all the flipping time, I think, really. So getting that group up and running would be great to start with.
I was going to raise the same thing. I think number 1 should happen by anyway, no matter what. And then actually option 4 on page 240, the drafting of the terms of reference, cross out all the rest of being deferred, because we don't need to defer and wait for the next bit. We need to get onto it. Terms of reference has to come first. Then we need the advisory group set up, so that should become number 3. And then number 4 over on the first page should be the 4th. Number 2 should be the 4th thing. And also, like, yes, we need an independent chair, but they don't actually they have to have navigational experience or knowledge, but it's actually the people that are going to make up the advisory group that will actually help them. They just need to be a good person with good sound knowledge. They don't actually have to be an expert in their field or an expert in marine. They just need to be able to pull that group together and flush out what the best solutions are. So I don't think we need to look for too much of an expert, but the order is everything. It should be 1, 4, 3, and then 2.
Through the chair, this might be as easy as organising a cup of tea in a couple of weeks' time and bringing the parties together to actually ask them what this group might look like, how it should be formed, and what the terms should be. That might be a good starting point.
Good, but just looking at 22, and I asked Councillor Robson what he thought, but the idea of deferring the terms of reference, I mean, I think that's where the Chief Executive was also at, to get a good understanding of what we're talking about here before we get too formal and put in place terms of reference.
But perhaps if Council could just receive the report, which I think was the original recommendations, then on the basis of what we've heard today, arguably we could report back through the PSOC committee, through the General Manager's report, the steps, the process for discussion or endorsement at that point.
Just move it as it is.
Thank you. Sorry. So through the chair, I just wanted to say to the group behind us, in particular Erica, who sent us an email with their response to Max Pedersen's report. Thank you very much for going through that process. It certainly helped me to get a real understanding on the nature of your concerns, and I think hopefully the nature of this discussion will be pleasing to you at this point in time. Yep. Thank you.
Happy to move, Your Worship. That it be received, and on the understanding of the reassurances we received from the Chief Executive that it will come back to PSOC for something to... Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I've spoken enough on this topic today, thank you.
Thank you. I think it's been a really good discussion. We've come to a good place, and I know the staff have absolutely heard what the next steps are going to be, even though it's not documented in the recommendation, and the group that are here as well have heard what our next steps are going to be. So, yeah, look forward to the next report.
Unless you want to sit and nut it out now, because that's what the alternative is. Yeah, the advice from the chief executive is you can move A, B and C, it doesn't, yeah. So with the mover and seconders okay about it, we can move A, B and C. All the other points have been noted, Marty will be coming back to us at PSOC.
The key issue is the understanding that the staff have, and I believe that's clear, and we understand their understanding, we're good to go.
Anything else? No right of reply, so I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Against, so that's carried. Thanks very much. It's been a long wait for you. We'll now revert back to DC 172, which is the City Council Tsunami Update Report. Page 183, 82. So we've had a number of questions on that. So, Councillor Morris, you've sort of taken a bit of a lead in this. Is there anything you would like to finally ask, or would you like to move something?
I'd like to move something, Your Worship, on the here's a draft resolution I pre-prepared earlier. But before I formally do that, with your indulgence, Mr. Chair, I'd just like staff to comment, if appropriate, on the proposed wording of the resolution. And it's going to appear. Oh, it's all in red. The changes to the staff recommendation are in bold.
Can you talk through any of the changes? Or
Yeah, sure.
differences?
Okay, so I've put the word Mount Primary in there because the previous text said Ormanu, and if we were to include stage 2, that takes the area up to roughly Mount Primary rather than Ormanu, which is actually kind of more Arataki in terms of stage 1. In terms of the other E, F and G, E is largely the same, except I've deleted a portion there. F talks about utilising the existing budget for vertical evacuation structures, which is in the 2018-28 LTP already, given that we have some uncertainty as to whether that full budget is needed, and that's going to take some time to work through. And that G, we consider stage 3, which is sort of the mountain shopping area north and the rest of the city, which is, you know, your Mātuas and Welcome Bays and even the CBD, through the 21-31 LTP process. There's some technical reasons why you wouldn't do stage 3 at this time, but I'm happy to answer that in debate. Is there any comment from staff, any violent reactions of there's something unachievable that resolution, because I'd like to know now, because usually when I'm halfway through my stride, someone will say, actually, no, you screwed up
Actually,
there.
it's F, which I think staff need to clarify what we're talking about there.
Through you, Your Worship, we clearly understand the intent of the new resolutions. There's a very clear message that you'd like to see us get on with stage 1, 2 and arguably 3 as possible. There is funding in the long-term plan. You'd like us to make adjustments to ensure that money isn't inhibiting us or prohibiting us from expediting the siren stages as soon as possible, or as practical.
Could I just ask that in G then, could we have some comms around an explanation for the residents of Matua and other places that we're not talking about 2025, 26, what are the reasons why that has to be delayed? We're going to do it as quick as we can. That's okay.
Yep, well, we can do that.
So where we say in F, bring forward, in what year in the LTP budget is stage 2? Is budget for stage 2? How, bringing it forward what, from year 5 to
Stage 2, in terms of sirens, is not in the LTP budget, but in terms of the wider civil defence activity, the vertical evacuation structures sit in there, and so it's utilising, I'm not sure which year, perhaps staff can advise me which year the first of those structures is to be spent, potentially, because I think that's the question you're asking, isn't it? Yeah.
Potentially it's still up for debate each annual plan, or the relevant annual plan that you're talking about. When do you anticipate this budget or stage 2 being delivered?
Today, or from today.
No current. There's no budget in the current budget.
Through the chair, sorry, just getting my papers. So the first VES is planned in 2022, and the second one is planned in 2024, and the third one is in 2026, with the last one linked to development by a developer in Wairaki. So
Needs to be a discussion next year's annual plan. Can't be done this year.
To vertical evacuation structures, they take some years of planning and time in terms of construction.
Question to the Chief Executive, can we bring forward something in an agreed LTP budget for an activity without an annual plan?
Yes, we can. Yeah, we do it regularly in the infrastructure space. Yeah.
For clarity, and certainly for people reading these decisions, it would be of some help, I believe, if we could specify an amount being brought forward and from when to when. Just to make it clear, because if you bring forward a significant amount of what would previously be debt-funded expenditure, you actually change your year-end position in terms of debt. You potentially incur additional OPEX ahead of budget, assuming they have OPEX costs. It has implications. We can't simply say, we had $10 million in the last year of the LTP, we're going to bring it forward to this year and spend it. So we need to evidence, the sort of things that I'm sure our auditors would like to see.
If council was of the mind, we could report the financial details back to the Finance Audit and Risk Committee. If we agree with the recommendations here, subject to the financial detail reported to the Finance Committee, at which stage we'll be able to provide some financial sense to the conversation.
No, Mr. Chair.
Oh, speak to the resident.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, questions.
So just for clarity, before we have a vote, there's just two things I would like to sort out in my mind. One is that tsunami sirens will get a priority in the budget over vertical mounds, is that correct? And my second question is, so we're not being political, the greatest need, just I'm asking to the staff, the greatest need, is that along the Papamoa Mount area rather than the Matua area? I just want to prioritise the most important area rather than make it political. So I'd just like to know those two answers, please.
And the rationale behind it is to focus on the widest inundation, most highly populated area where it will make a difference in the first stage. And it also is technically far more achievable in terms of what we've proposed in terms of achieving that in a 2-year time frame.
So the answer is yes.
And my other question was, just for clarity, so the tsunami sirens will be prioritised over doing the vertical mounds, is that correct? Yes, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Thanking you before people have spoken and voted. Gee, that's a recipe for disaster, isn't it? Pardon the pun, because there was a pun in there somewhere. Thank you, colleagues. In terms of getting on with the project, it has been a number of years, or 10 years, that council has been considering this in one form or another. By taking this step today, and obviously subject to reporting of the financials to Finance and Risk, we are undertaking to really get on with it within the next, the planning, hopefully within the next 6 months, construction, hopefully within 12 months, but you'd say within 18 months to 2 years, we would have sirens along our coastline. In terms of stage 3, there are some technical reasons why we can't do that just now. If we waited to have stage 3 in with stages 1 and 2, it would slow stages 1 and 2 down, and we wouldn't be doing stages 1 and 2 for potentially 5 years. So this enables us to put a spade in the ground relatively shortly in terms of planning timeframes and to get on with it. Stage 3 is crucial. I mean, there's, in terms of the technical aspects, as I understand it, there are topography issues when it comes to getting signal, and so that may incur some radio and transmission issues that need to be taken care of. But in the immediate future, we can look forward to stages 1 and 2 being undertaken and delivering on this need that the community has been talking to us about for a number of years. So I do wholeheartedly support the recommendation, my recommendation, my motion.
Yeah, thank you. So as we've always discussed this ever since I've been on council about what we've already got in the toolbox, which is, the texts, the alerts, the emails. We've got neighbourhood supporters, the Mayor talked about before. We've got signs, we've got maps, we've got in-house maps and maps in the community out along the coastline. We've got directional signage, we've got the routes there, and we've got a practice community. We've had open days. We've done everything we can to fully inform the community about what they need to do. So we also need to do our bit. I think the voice-capable warning system is the critical part, because just 2 weeks ago when we had that first text come through, my friend texted me, "What do I do?" So people don't know what to do. So having a voice-capable system is critical to actually tell people what to do. Reduces panic, reduces people wondering what to do, and time delays, and will tell them what to do. So that's, I think, absolutely critical. It would be great to have some consistency across New Zealand, which is work in progress. I think that's really important. And I think it's good that we've put the VES systems on hold, because in fact they may not be required. But the one thing I do hope is that, as you spoke to before, staff spoke about, the resource consent will take 6 months and the procurement 12 months, so hopefully they can work side by side. So in fact it's not an 18-month program, that they can work concurrently with each other to deliver to our community a really good tsunami warning system which is voice capable.
Thank you. This is the kind of decision that the community wants us to make. It's been a long time coming. I've been advocating ever since I've been here for tsunami sirens. So it's a great day, and and it's a great decision because this will have a great impact for our community and also for visitors. So these are kind of decisions we need to make more often, practical decisions that benefit a majority of people.
Okay, Councillor Granger and Kurak, and then Councillor Clout.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I just want to thank Councillor Morris, and I know that's been a few years now, Councillor, that you've certainly had a lot of effort and certainly pushed this along. I can remember a number of years ago too, I was one that certainly supported sirens, and it's sad to say that not quite the sirens I wanted, these ones, but the old air raid sirens are one that's still in the back of my mind and always have been. But hey, look, it's great to have this on board, and as I said, it certainly is a long time coming. Sirens are wanted by the people out there, the community, and they made that loud and clear, and it's great that now we can pull stage 2 a little closer and have stage 1 and 2 close together. So look, I'm looking forward to it. No doubt the community is the same, and I think they're the fantastic steps that we've done, and just look, again, thank you, Councillor Morris, for what you've done.
Yes, certainly all about providing peace of mind to the community, particularly in those coastal areas. It's about quality of life, and some people are quite worried, particularly when we hear of certain events that happen around the world. So yeah, absolutely supportive. But in terms of it being reported back to the FAR committee for the sign-off of the additional budget, I'd be pleased if we could add another resolution at the end that E, F and G is subject to FAR committee approval. If the mover and seconder would be happy just to formalise that. Great. Thank you, Robin. You got that? So E, F and G are subject to approval by the FAR committee. The budget, yeah, the financials be reported through or financials be approved by the FAR committee.
Through the chair, stage 1 is already approved, so could that perhaps reference
G and H.
F and G?
F and G, yeah.
Yeah, thanks to Councillor Morris for initiating the bringing forward of stage 2. I think that makes a lot of sense. When I was at the opening of the vertical evacuation mound or structure, I had a lot of feedback, people saying that, it's a massive cost for sort of uncertain benefits. And also the number of people that could fit on it, was quite small compared to the whole population. So I have always had concerns about those. So I think it's appropriate that we are putting those on hold and redirecting those funds into this siren system. So well done.
Look, I support this quite happily. It's like everyone, I think, here, the need for a warning device for tsunami when you're a small island on a Pacific ring makes a lot of sense. I suppose I'd note that I'm pleased we didn't act intemperately earlier and wind up with a siren system that perhaps wasn't as good as one that would be part of a properly supported national network. Sometimes we have constraints as the local government, while central government and other groups get their act together and recognise the importance of things that we know are important to our community. So I suppose if I was going to thank anyone, I would thank the people of Tauranga for being patient while we worked our way through the mire that is central government thinking and got to a position where we managed to get alignment. I'm sorry it's taken so long.
Yeah, I think this is really, really good progress. It has been a long journey. It has been, I think, 9 years at least in making. And I support the voice-capable siren system as the complement to a suite of other options which we've already been working through in-house and so on. But we do need that because not everyone's going to be at home tucked up in their bed when a tsunami comes, and you could be at the beach. You need that. I was going to say that the real progress being made was that this might have been the first meeting we've ever had to discuss tsunami things without mentioning World War II sirens, but Councillor Granger got in before me, so I shall conclude with that.
Very happy to support, but I think there needs to be a word of caution that the early warning device, unless it's linked to a device system, well off our coast, because if we had a major earthquake in the Kermadec Trench, that we wouldn't necessarily feel here, and the resulting waves travel at 800 kilometres an hour. It would take an hour basically to get here, and by the time the alarm went off, it would probably be too late. So it's just a word of caution. I think we need to understand that, but happy to support.
I just suffice it to say thank you, colleagues. Thank you.
Put that all in favour, say aye. Against? So it's carried. Thank you. Now on to DC 125 CCO Working Group Terms of Reference.
Happy to move.
You don't have to go yet.
Check that there aren't any questions, or if Anne wants to make a statement first, but she doesn't, no. So have you any questions of Anne in the meantime? Otherwise so it's been moved and seconded by Councillor Mason and Councillor Baldock. I'd like to speak to it, Councillor. It has been moved and seconded, so now's your opportunity if you want to speak to it. The mover has chosen not to speak. What about the seconder? No.
Thank you.
Councillor Robson?
Look, I think, and in terms of thanking people, I think it's appropriate to thank Councillor Mason, who I understand has sort of publicly said he's not standing again for council. But I think the work he's done in this area has been significant and highly valuable. I note reference on para 8 to the Morrison Lowe reports, which I was sadly a victim of when I arrived in council in 2013, of really appalling, and they made all sorts of claims about the benefits that would arise from what we undertook, but they really set BVL, amongst other things, up to fail, I think, in terms of the expectations that were raised. I'm pleased that the council of that triennium worked to make it work, and I'm very pleased at the work that's been done this triennium by the members of the CCO working group, and particularly by Councillor Mason, to improve and continue to improve the relationship that we have, particularly with BVL. They're our biggest CCO. And I think this is another proper step along the line of getting that relationship, providing maximum benefit to our community. But it is a work in progress. CCOs need managing. It's that second letter, the controlled bit. We should never relinquish that. We know there are enough local authorities who seem to, for whatever reasons, abdicate their responsibility for that second letter. But yeah, this is a very good step, and I thank you, Councillor Mason.
No further comments?
Just a right reply, thank you. Since thanks are being given, thank you, Councillor Robson. I just want to thank Anne for her excellent stewardship of this. She's doing an excellent job, and it really does, a lot of it, most of it is actually down to her very careful management. So thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Anne. We'll let you go early. Okay, so I'll put that. All in favour, say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. And then on to DC 191 Event Funding Framework. Blake Park, sorry. Just testing. Page 206, Blake Park, and that's a tabled item. Yeah. the 233 and it's been tabled.
I'm happy to move, sir.
Any questions for Mark or indeed yourselves first? Okay, well, I'll accept it, moved and seconded. Moved by Councillor Clout and seconded by Councillor Kurak.
Thank
Speak
you.
to
I
it.
just conscious that Mark and I think Anne have been sitting here all day for their place in the sun. So thanks for your patience. And so I think we all know the background of this working group, and we've had one or two meetings internally, and then we've had an external meeting already, which I thought went well. And so we are making progress. And I just wanted to point out that we do intend that this group does wrap up by the end of September. So we do have a time frame on it. It's not going to be an ongoing group. So
May
thank
not be
you
a
very
choice,
much.
might there?
And thank you to my thank you to my colleagues, Councillor Robson and Morris.
No, just be looking forward to getting all the issues resolved and them all being happy campers.
The people in the working group, because it is the only way we are going to move forward, having everybody in the room and trying to sort through the issues. Toing and froing with resolutions at council meeting was never going to solve this. So, thank you. So if there's any right of reply, so I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Against, so that's carried. And now on to the event funding framework, DC 191.
Through the chair, I'll table the report as is, except to say that a year ago through this committee we established the event funding framework and the event funding panel. It's been operating successfully in our opinion for a year, but we wanted to make some minor tweaks to the way we were doing our business. We took that to the event funding panel in early June and got some additional feedback, and that's included in the report today. We've also published a list of all of the events that we've supported in year one, and from now on we will do that on an as decision basis. So as soon as we receive applications and make decisions, we'll publicly acknowledge that. Open for any questions.
Any questions? Yes, Councillor Kurak.
Through you, Gareth, how often do you review some of the major events that seem to be well heeled, and events like the Garden Art Fest, Jazz to a certain extent, where their balance sheets would be fairly healthy. I haven't seen them for many years, but they have been improving over the years. And I recall questions a number of years ago, just asking why does the ratepayer have to keep contributing when they're self-sustainable and got a fairly healthy balance sheet under them?
Yeah, through the chair, I think that those two events in particular, and many others would argue that they don't have a very healthy balance sheet. We have a plan to review all of the major and legacy events that we fund on a 3-yearly basis, so we have a cycle so that we're not doing them all in the same year. We specifically signed up to a system called Event Economics for understanding the value and benefit of the events that we do. We're starting to roll that out now on a pretty regular basis. We used to do it on an ad hoc report basis that cost quite a lot of money. So you should see in our reporting going forward much more regular post-event reporting about how the events did, the economic benefit, the social benefits, and the financial sustainability of the event itself.
When you look at the calculated economic benefit to the city, does that basically support a lot of the criteria for that ratepayer funding, even though it might have a healthy balance sheet? Because under that, Tauranga Arts Festival, sure, it brings a lot of, not a lot, but a significant economic benefit. But if it's self-sustained on an ongoing basis, no risk, what weighting is the economic benefit given in some of those assessments of need?
I can't remember the exact weighting, but it's just one of the factors we look at. That conversation opens up a broader conversation about supporting events on an ongoing basis and whether or not council should be in that business. There are plenty of events that would argue that we should be, and Arts Festival are absolutely the first cab off the rank in any city in this country that put up an argument for the fact that the city should support, an annual or a biennial arts festival. I guess we grappled with that decision quite a lot when we set up the event funding framework, because coming from ATEED, we had a portfolio of 36 events where 80% of the money on an annual basis was already pre-committed to ongoing events, so it didn't give you a lot of scope for doing new things or responding to change or growth in the city. So when we set up the event funding framework, we wanted to make sure we didn't become that financial crutch to events on an ongoing basis. And one of the things we're addressing in the changes in here is softening that a little bit, because I think we're a little bit too hard with our position on that. And I guess we believe that there is some, it's not responsibility, but there is some schools of thought that think council should be supporting some of those core events on an ongoing basis, and then there are other schools of thought that says they should stand on their own 2 feet and die if they haven't got the money to pay for them. I guess we set up the Legacy Event Fund with some specific criteria to support a few events on an ongoing basis, as opposed to a whole lot of events being able to get money for eternity. And it's working relatively well. I think the Arts Festival would suggest that we don't give them enough money. So would the Jazz Festival and others, but I think with event economics coming online now, we're going to be able to look at the benefit that spits out of that and kind of justify our investment. Happy to re-look at that ongoing investment in the future, if that's the will of the council.
Land, perhaps, review. Yeah. Thanks, Gareth.
Through the chair to Gareth. Where an event is cancelled, what is the policy regarding that?
Through the chair, we try and recover that money. On certain occasions, some of the funds that we've committed have already been spent, so that's just an ongoing conversation. So, for example, the Santa Parade last year, we gave them $5,000. They'd already spent some of that money in preparation. It got cancelled, and they kept half of that money, and we got half of it back. It's a case-by-case discussion.
And secondly, what are we doing to reduce the amount of usage on the Mount Peninsula? So are events encouraged to go elsewhere, or given the high demand and the high usage of that area?
Through the chair, as part of the event funding framework, we did a couple of things in that regard. We created a priority called Priority Spaces and Places. It used to be Priority Parks, to try and encourage event organisers to use other spaces. That's had limited success so far, because ultimately event organisers are the one taking the risk. They'll do their event where they want to do their event, regardless of what we think. The event facilitation team run an annual process to get all of the dates for all of the events in, and then we to some extent curate the program. So we, for example, won't allow back-to-back triathlons on Maymount Beach or the Pilot Bay side, because we know the impact that has on local residents. So we're pretty careful about that. Ultimately, I don't think we're going to get away from the fact that the demand to do things in the Mount North Peninsula is probably going to continue to grow, but we manage it as carefully and as we can. It's a bit of a balancing act.
Councillor Brown, is there a question, or you're looking to move, or both? Yeah.
Gareth, some of the councillors aren't aware of the Kaupapa Māori Fund. Do you want to just speak briefly to that, the purpose of it, and how we've staged it into different levels and investments?
Sure. Through the chair, there was what we noticed prior to starting the event funding framework, that there was a relatively low investment in Māori specific events. We made it a priority of the event funding framework, and that has definitely helped to allow us to support more Māori focused events. Taking that the next step, we've partnered with TECT, and we've pre-approved $20,000 this year, $25,000 the next, and $30,000 the following year, matched dollar for dollar with TECT to support Kaupapa Māori events on an ongoing basis. So we've empowered the Takawaenga unit to receive applications to invest that money in events, and that started a couple of weeks ago.
question, Councillor Robson.
Yeah, it's fascinating for me that in the body of the report, from the heading through the paragraphs, options to the sign-off, we don't actually mention the sum in the event funding framework being allocated for this year as a memo line or anything else, which I found slightly disconcerting. I accept that if one goes through the report and through the notes and to the list of events, you can come up with a total, but I note that the report doesn't actually include a number, and I think it would be healthy for us to understand that. In the build-up to this, and I think the framework seems to be working quite well as from what I hear, where are we with, because I remember some discussion last triennium, and I don't know what happened in the sabbatical period, with regard to external people who were going to match that. Last triennium there was a discussion and we were being exhorted to put money into events, significant amounts, and some of the benefactors of our largesse in terms of not charging cost of capital on development contributions amongst other things, were insistent that if we committed money into events, they would make, and I went away. What happened to that conversation? Because it doesn't seem to be in here anywhere, the largesse of our rich and wealthy advocates of us supporting these events. Did that go anywhere, or can someone...
Through the chair, that was also before my time, but that did not go anywhere. I think the only investment from an external party along those lines was $12,500 contribution to, I want to say, the World Junior Squash Championships, off the top of my head. So that is the answer to that question. It is on our radar in terms of the future. The goal over the last year, 18 months, has been to build a solid foundation for how we do our business, and I think once we're doing that well, there's the opportunity to kind of go out and try to generate other forms of revenue. Having said that, we used to have someone employed to do that, and the amount of revenue they generated did not cover their salary, so it didn't really make a lot of sense, but it is something on the radar to look at in the future.
Councillor Brown, yes. And so moved by Councillor Brown and seconded by Councillor Baldock. Any comments?
Just very briefly, I think, Gareth's presentation and speaking to the report, we're not doing just more events, we're doing better events, and we've got quality events coming through the city. We've got people coming to us now to host their events in Tauranga City. We've got our 4 categories. We've got community events, got the event support fund, the major event fund, and the legacy fund. So those 4 different funds give us the opportunity to fund different events for different reasons and for different periods of time. And I think that's working really well. The funding decisions we're making now, we have a really good framework. There's no longer, we have to because we have in the past, or we need to because they know someone who knows someone. We've got a really good, professional, robust framework to use to make those decisions. We've got a great reputation for events, particularly in our event support. What I'm hearing from event organisers, our staff are doing a fantastic job in facilitating events, enabling events, supporting them with, particularly around OSH and health and safety and just what to do in the city in terms of recycling and all those sorts of things. So we've got a great team and really look forward to this new framework rolling out this year.
Any other speakers?
Yep. Second.
Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I'd like to compliment Councillor Brown on her input into lots of this with the events and the chairing of the Community Events Fund. And also to Gareth, I like Councillor Brown, hear lots of good comments from the community saying how really good our events team is, how they help. And Gareth's input into the framework that we're signing off on today. I hope he is as successful in his new role and influence in council as he has been when he came here to work with our events. Many things in my memory are dimming slowly as I get older, but one remains very, very vivid when I chaired the events funding subcommittee in 2011 through to 13, and the scraps we used to have over a budget of 300,000. And I remember the day when the Ames game people came in here to get funding for the next thing, and people were saying, "Oh, we're going to stop propping them up," and no, they just looked like, good night. We have moved on amazingly, and fortunately the Ames Games is still located in Tauranga, as are some other fantastic events. So, and the value that events bring to our city is just, it cannot be overstated in my opinion.
Thank you. I just, Larry, I think Councillor Larry's encouraged me to have a say as well. I remember those days, and the framework was very limiting, and it created a lot of frustration among some councillors. So it's good that it's improved since then, and yeah, thank you, Gareth, and your team for the work you do.
Yeah, just again, thanks to Gareth and your team for absolutely elevating the quality of the way that we approach events. You know, having a framework like this is absolutely fantastic, and especially around the what I particularly like are the economics. You know, the measurability of the benefit to the community. But you know, just in terms of sort of Councillor Kirrick's comments earlier on, you know, not everything can be measured, but the amount of social cohesion and quality of life aspects that come with events is just fantastic. If you think of the feel good factor around Ames Games and the incredible benefit of kids learning you know, competitive pursuits and competing at a certain level, the Tonish Rocks and Divas, the Arts Festival, the Garden Arts Festival, all these things are really what makes Tauranga what it is. You know, it's part of the mosaic of living in a fantastic city. And you know, I think if we had to substantially reduce the amounts of funding for events, we would yeah, be really detracting from the quality of our city. So thank you.
I can rely on Councillor Baldock. The value of events can be overstated and frequently is. It can also be understated and frequently was. What we needed was to introduce some professional discipline into a space where overstatement and overclaim were the basis by which people got money. And I thank the staff, not the councillors, I thank the staff, not the councillors, for introducing that level of professionalism in our decision making. I do agree with Councillor Mason that some things are difficult to measure, albeit we should possibly make more attempt to measure those things. But I say again, the value of many things can be overstated. Events, museums, all sorts of things can be overstated. We need discipline in our decision making. And as I say, I thank again the staff for the work they've done in this area, particularly yourself, Gareth, and I trust the person who's actually working this role now, and I ask for an excuse for not knowing their name, ask for pardon, but I hope they continue your good work.
The only thing I'll just say is there was a comment earlier about some of the events that have been going a long time and still getting council funding. They would probably also see, just in a bit of defence of that they want to introduce new ideas, they want to introduce new things, and they need the funding for that, and they believe that they have a proven record, and that's actually true. So they believe that when they get that extra money to do something new, that we can have a confidence that it will be delivered. So let's just put the different side, you know, to that. Yeah.
And I think in response to Councillor Mason, we don't dispute the value of events and what makes the city. It's the ratepayer input that I find, you know, sometimes can't be justified. When we look, and Councillor Stewart mentioned the painful process we went through some years ago when we had a very tiny budget. You know, I'm not sure what the overall events budget was, but something like probably 400,000. You know, in a very short time, it's up to 2.8 million. From 400,000 in 10 years, it's up to 2.8 million. And you know, significant increase. And if you try to gauge the value of that additional budget, you think, are we getting value for money?
Through the chair, our annual budget at the moment is about $850,000, and apologies for omission from the front part of the report. We'll make sure that doesn't happen in the future. Also, we are quite keen, I don't know whether it'll happen before the election, but to involve elected members in a workshop of our event economic system, so you guys can actually see the data that goes in and the data that spits out the other side to try and understand the value of events. So we will try and make that happen.
So a question that, before I brought up the figure of 2.8, I went to our detailed budget book for this budget, And the figure there is $2,835,051.
So through the chair, staff costs, facilitation, that the money that we actually invest in events through the event funding framework is about $850,000 a year at the moment.
But the 2.8 is legitimate.
That's the
cost.
total. That's the total event team budget.
Yep.
Oh no, I've been triggered. Apologies. I'm just reading back a news article back in 2014 when the Council of the Day decided to increase the events budget. There was a statement that in the coming financial year, Council proposes the $200,000 for major events will be matched by an additional $200,000 from external investment from the great and the good of our city. And we know that that didn't happen. We've talked about promises made and promises kept already today. What transpired as a result of that promise not being made, I think, was a resolution in 2016 from Councillor Robson and Councillor Curak around the Bay Oval lights to ensure that philanthropists put their money in first, and that occurred. But that was just a bit of a history lesson for my colleagues. I thought I'd be useful and add that to the debate.
Hey, right of reply?
No, but suffice to say that as Gareth spoke to about the Kaupapa Māori Legacy Fund, that is being match funded by TECT, and I know that the staff have a mind to try and obtain funding wherever they can from philanthropists and other organisers around the city. I know Karis put a significant amount of money into Tarnish Frocks and Divas and other events, so we're seeing it, but perhaps not as obvious as that particular move or that news media article in 2014.
So I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Aye. Against? So that's carried. Yes. Now we need a special resolution.
Yes, I'll happy to
because
move
we
it, yes.
have now passed
The
5
appointed
o'clock.
hour has arrived.
So you're moving that we continue the meeting?
I am.
So moved by Councillor Baldock and seconded by Councillor Brown. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against? So it is carried. We can continue. So,
Also move DC 180 if there are no questions.
okay, so there's the Waikario East Reserve. A number of us went out there in atrocious weather and had a further look. So it's been moved by Councillor Baldock. Is there a seconder? And then I will entertain questions if there are as well. A seconder? Councillor Malloy can be trusted to come to the occasion. Okay. And Sonia's here, so if there are any questions as well before discussion, Councillor Baldock.
Yeah, I thank Sonia and Mark who braved the weather that day, and the Mayor and Councillor Robson and others that came down, and Councillor Clout. And I think the recommendation in B, just to hold off on actually gazetting that little parcel of land until the roundabout issues have been settled, I think is wise. And I thank you for the indulgence of the site visit. But then I think everything else is pretty clear. You just hate to try and pull something back out of gazetted reserve if we needed it for a bit of widening of a ramp or something, if we're going to have an overpass going through there. Otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Anyone else wish to speak? So I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Against? So-
Abstention.
Okay, so an abstention from Councillor Stewart. And other than that, it's carried. The draft report's been pulled. Yes. So we've covered the Marine Precinct review. The draft pre-election report has been pulled. Did you want to speak to it?
Just speaking very briefly to that, as discussed with councillors yesterday, the draft report wasn't in an appropriate state to put into the public domain, and it's likely to be released early next week. Now, there is no requirement. I'll obviously pay the councillors the appropriate courtesy of letting them know when this is coming out before handover. Yep.
Okay, so that is the end of the open section. So I need to move it into confidential again. So it's been moved by Councillor Malloy and seconded by Councillor Clout. All in favour say aye.